morning. If you're visiting, I am not the pastor. I'm just filling in. Oh, thank you. Yes, they can be released. Is it kindergarten through fourth? Fourth. Thanks, Ashley.
You're welcome.
So this month we started a day of fasting and praying on the first Wednesday of the month. This month's focus was on unity. And as the leadership went through the book Until Unity, I just felt like God desiring to unite us more as a church. And this month, which the next day will be April 6th, which is a week from Wednesday, I feel like God is desiring us to pray about intercession. Intercession is the action of saying a prayer on behalf of another person. It's us going to the Father for others. Not only for ourselves, but for others, because I believe that's what God desires us to do. I believe He desires us to minister to others by praying for them. And I felt like God is saying, this is another way that you as a body of believers will come together as we intercede. A few weeks ago, we were at Dave and Diane's, and we talked about how we as a church came together when we decided to adopt. When we started the adoption journey, which was, if my calculations are correct, were 16 years ago, we came together as a body and prayed. And it was those prayers of this body that got us through the 3.5 years of that journey. And that continues to still get us through that journey. I believe, as I said, it will continue to bring us together, and we will see God move in some mighty ways. So today I want us to look at the book of Esther. We're not looking at the whole book, so don't worry. I'm going to try to summarize the book, but I'll tell you, if you've never read Esther, it's only 10 chapters. It's a quick read, but it's a great read. It's a great story about Esther. What stands out to me, as I was reading it, is, God brought forth a woman to save the Jews. Many times we read about what the men of the Bible did. But Esther, He used Esther, a woman, to save the Jews. And, and I was thinking about the women of this body, of this church, and nothing against us men, but I couldn't imagine Jesus Center without the women of this church. The women who continue to pray, continue to intercede, continue to serve, continue to minister, continue to be an example to all of us. It's just amazing to see the women and how God uses so many women of this church to continue to lead us, continue to guide us, continue to take us to where He desires us to go. And that's what He did with Esther. The other interesting thing about Esther was that Esther was an orphan. She had lost both parents, and that she was then adopted by her uncle Malachi. So he not only used a woman, but he also used an orphan. And it was just amazing to me. It just speaks to my heart. So I'm going to try to summarize the story of Esther. I started to tell my wife the story because she's more the historian, but I never got around to it. So if I forget something, again, 10 chapters, quick read, go back and read it. So as I said, Esther had been taken in by her uncle, had been adopted by her uncle. Esther became queen after the king, Xerxes, took the crown away from his wife because his wife wouldn't do what he wanted her to do. She went against the king, so he took away the crown. And I was just thinking about this morning, so then the king it was like a biblical, like the Bachelor episode. So he's bringing all these women in to figure out who is going to get the rose. And Esther ended up getting the rose, if you've never watched Bachelor. I don't watch it that much. Years ago, I say much. I don't know when the last time I watched it. So anyway, that's not part of this. So Mordecai tells her that when she goes to the king to hide the fact that she is Jewish, and because he just didn't want that to come into it, and he didn't want that to affect anything. So, as I said, Esther was picked to be his queen. So then there was the king's right-hand man was Haman, And Mordecai would not bow down to Haman. And Haman got mad, and because in his eyes, Mordecai was disrespecting him. So Haman wanted to get back at Mordecai, so he thought, I could have him killed, but instead, I'm going to hurt him even worse. I'm going to have all the Jews killed. So he went to the king. The king agreed with Haman to have all the Jews in the country killed. So it was in the month of April, and so it was decided they would throw lots. So to me, it's like throwing dice to figure out when this would all take place. So the date was picked for March 7th of the following year that all the Jews would be killed. And the king put this decree in effect and had it signed by, he wrote his name, had it signed by his signet ring, that this would be what happened. And anybody that killed a Jew would then receive that person's property, that person's money, everything of that person's, that's what they would get. So that's when it brings us to chapter 4 of Esther. So I want to touch on the first verse I want to look at is verse 3. So Esther chapter 4, verse 3. And it says, as the news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was a great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. So here's the Jews found out what was going to happen to them. They found out that they were going to be killed, and it was ordered by the king. So they went into mourning. I mean, what else would you do? I would go into mourning if I found out that I was going to be killed in less than a year. But what did they do? It says they fasted. And my opinion is, along with fasting, I believe they prayed. I believe they did what they thought they could do. All they could do, probably. Probably they figured all I can do is go to God. All I can do is pray. All I can do is fast. And I believe they just fasted and prayed for themselves. I believe they fasted and prayed for the Jewish community, the Jewish country. I believe they interceded for all the Jews. And that's what I believe God is asking of us. I believe He's asking of us to ramp up our intercession. There are so many things we could be interceding for on a regular basis. I think about, and I'm not political. I don't want to know what your political beliefs are, but right now my opinion is we as a country should be interceding for Ukraine. We should be interceding for Russia, for the people that are the innocent people that are being affected by this. We are to be interceding. We are to be going to God for this. We are to be interceding for our country. I believe biblically we are to intercede daily for those in authority. I'm sorry, I don't care what you think of the president, but we are told biblically to intercede every time for the people in authority. Because if we're to be Christ-like, and I will show later how Christ interceded. If we're to be Christ-like, then we are to be interceding. We are to be doing what the Bible tells us to do. So, I will say it again. I'm sorry if I'm on my soapbox. You know what? They allowed me to preach. I will say what I feel like I want to say. We are to intercede for those in authority. I don't believe we are to get on Facebook and bash those in authority. I don't believe that's biblical. That's my opinion, but I believe it's biblical. I don't believe we're to do that. I believe if God has told us to intercede for someone, I don't believe in the next breath and we can bash them and we can downgrade them. We are to be praying. I'm sorry that wasn't part of this. So as we will look in chapter 4, if I can pull this up. So later in chapter 4, so then Esther hears what's going on with Mordecai. She hears that they're mourning, that they're weeping, and that they have torn their clothes. So she sends in clothes out to Mordecai. She sends clothes out for him to cover himself, probably to get dressed. because she probably didn't like what this was looking like. But in verse 13, Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. You know, that part stands out to me. He says to her, maybe this is why you were made queen. You know, and I have to believe that. I have to believe that of all the women that was presented to the king, he chose Esther. I believe that was God. I believe God put her in this place, put her in a place of authority so that she could eventually save the Jews. And I believe that God does that to us. I believe that God is putting each of us in a place to where we're to be interceding for others, to where we're supposed to be going to Him. I believe each of us are coming in contact with people on a day-to-day basis that need prayer, that need intercession. And I believe we are the ones to be interceding. Because there are people that you're going to be coming in contact with that I will not. And that's why you're to be interceding. And I believe that we're going to see God move through this. I believe as we come together, as we come to Him, as we bring people to Him, to His feet, I believe we're going to see God move in a mighty way. So then going on, in verse 15 it says, and Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same, and then though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So for her to go into the king and not be invited to the king, it was immediate death. But she was willing to die. She was willing to die for her people. She was willing to die for the Jews. But again, if we look, what did she ask them to do? She asked them to fast. And again, I believe she asked them to not only fast, but intercede. So I believe they went to God, interceding for the Jews, interceding for Esther, for her to go into the king to talk to the king. And as the story goes, she goes in and talks to the king, and he grants her request. So her request was that the Jews pretty much be able to fight for themselves, be able to fight on March 7th, when it's to be the day that they're going to be killed. So the king granted her wish and made another decree, but he said both decrees will stand. So now we have the decree that the Jews will be killed, but we also have another decree from the king that they can fight. So I wonder, I was thinking, why did God allow both decrees to stand? Because, he could have probably had the one taken away. But I believe the reason he did, I believe the reason why both decrees still stood was for God's power to be seen. I believe that's the way that His power would be seen. That they would see that He answered the prayers of the people. That they would see that because of their fasting and their intercession, that He saved the Jews. I mean, we just read in Exodus 10 that if you're reading along with the church right now, we just read in Exodus 10 that it talked about that God said He hardened the heart of Pharaoh. And why did He harden the heart of Pharaoh? He did it so that Moses would be able to tell his children and his grandchildren of what God did. He would have a testimony. They would be able to see what He did, even though Pharaoh's heart was hardened. they would be able to see what God did. They would be able to see his power. And I believe that's why both decrees still stood of the king. So there's one more verse I want to share. And it's verse 9, or it's chapter 9, verse 1. It says, "So on March 7th, the 2 decrees of the king were put into effect. On that day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but quite the opposite happened. It was the Jews who overpowered their enemies." So the Jews won. The Jews were able to fight back. The Jews were not taken out that day. And why? My belief is because of Esther. And what's interesting is that the Jews just celebrated, I think I read, it was March 17th. And it was a holiday where they celebrate what Esther did. So to this day, they are still celebrating the victory. So I still believe, my belief is that Esther was put into place as queen so that she could save the Jews. I believe that God moved in response to their fasting. I believe he moved in response to their prayers to save the Jews. And I believe he did it so that there would be a testimony. There is still to this day a testimony as the Jews celebrate this. There's a testimony to what God did, how God interceded, how God gave them a victory. I ask myself sometimes, what is God desiring to answer out of us? What prayers is God desiring to answer that we're not asking? I think there's many prayers that go unanswered because we don't ask God. I think about us as parents. We don't always just give our kids everything, but we desire them to seek us. We desire them to do what we ask. And God is, he is asking us to pray. He is asking us to intercede. He is asking us to fast. It is biblical to fast. In James 4, it talks about that. Let me go over there. That way I don't get it wrong. In James 4:2, it says, "Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure." I believe, again, there are prayers, there are blessings that God is desiring to give us, but we haven't asked. Now, I will be the first to, I don't believe God is going to give us everything we ask for. I don't believe that. I don't believe just because you ask for a certain amount of money or you ask for a new car that God's going to give it. I just don't believe that. Because as it says in the one verse, your motives are wrong. I believe when we intercede, I believe when we come to God, we come and we ask the Spirit to lead us. We ask the Spirit to lead our prayers. We ask him to guide us as we pray. And I believe that as we empty ourselves, and I believe that's what we're doing through fasting. We empty ourselves for a day. And I believe when we empty ourselves, we are allowing ourselves to be filled by the Spirit. Because if we are filled with so much junk, there's no room for the Spirit to move. There's no room for the Spirit to come and fill us. And as the Spirit fills us, he's going to overflow. And I believe that overflow is going to be through intercession. I believe that overflow is going to be through ministry. I believe that overflow is going to be out of asking him or seeking him. So, in Luke 5, we see God move in response to intercession. We see God move in response to friends. It's the story of the paralyzed man. His friends was bringing him to Jesus. And there were so many people they couldn't get him through the crowd. So what did they do? They went up to the roof, they put a hole in the roof, and they lowered him to Jesus. And it says, because of the faith of the friends, he was healed. It wasn't because of the man's faith. It was because of the faith of his friends. His friends were interceding, in my opinion. They were bringing him to the feet of Jesus. And I believe that's what we do through intercession. We bring our friends, we bring our relatives, we bring our family to the feet of Jesus. And I believe it's through that faith he is going to heal. Now, I don't know why God doesn't heal everything. I have no clue. That is not something I can answer. If somebody can tell me that, I would love to know. But I don't believe that's for us to know. I believe it's for us to pray. It's for us to intercede. It's for us to grow closer to God. And then we have to trust that His answer is the best. That His plan is the best. You know, in Acts 7, it's the story of Stephen. Stephen was being stoned. He was brought forth by the council because of what he was preaching, what he was speaking. And they stoned him. And it says in Acts 7, so Acts 7 in 59 says, as they stoned him, Stephen prayed, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. He fell to his knees shouting, Lord, don't charge them with this sin. And with that, he died. As he was being stoned, he was interceding for the people stoning him. That was his last words, were an intercession. I mean, I can't pray for people that wrong me. But here Stephen is stoning for the people that are killing him at that present time. You know, I'm sorry, I will just be honest. As I said, I have a hard time praying for the people. I mean, George talked about it. You know, we're to love our enemies. I believe we're to intercede for everyone. Not just for the people that do what we want. Not just for the ones that like us. I believe we're to intercede for everyone. And as, you know, George talked about, you know, Judas. Jesus washed his feet. He showed his love. And I think we show our love by intercession. In Luke, it talks about one of the last things Jesus did while he was on the cross is he asked for forgiveness for the people that were doing it. And again, for us to be Christ-like, for us to go to be who we're to be, I think we're to intercede. God's been speaking to me about testimony. You know, and I talked about that in Exodus 10, that he hardened the heart of Pharaoh and that Moses would have a testimony. I believe we saw that through Esther. The Jews had a testimony that they still celebrate to this day of what God did. In Revelation 12, it says, the enemy is defeated by the blood of the Lamb and our testimony. The power of our testimony will defeat the enemy. And I believe it defeats the enemy because as we intercede, as we walk through trials, as we walk through journeys, we will have a testimony that we can tell others, this is what God did. This is what God did because of our intercession. This is what God's hand did. You know, as I said, God's been speaking testimony to me. And a couple weeks ago, I wrote out the guide for April that we'll be getting next week. And in there, at the bottom, there's some points. And I said, for us to have intercession, we have to be real. We have to bring those things to other people that we need prayer for. Well, I just tell you that as you write something or as you say something, God will bring that back around. This week has been a rough week in our house. Last Monday, Tammy had a procedure. That's why she wasn't here last Sunday. She was preparing for that. But last Monday, she had a procedure. And the doctor came in, you know, we went into this, you know, thinking no big deal, routine, not a big deal. Well, we had the doctor come in afterwards and say, I have concerns. He said, we have to wait for the biopsy, but if it's not cancer, it will turn into cancer. He said, so you need to see a surgeon. And he said, you'll need surgery. He said, you may need radiation, you may need chemo. He said, but we need to wait for the biopsy. So we kind of kept it hush because we weren't telling all the kids everything until we knew for sure what it came out. And I've always wondered what it was like between the test and then when you get the results back. That is not a good amount of time. I've always wondered about that, and you just don't know what to do with yourself until you get the results. Well, we got the results on Wednesday. They told us 3 to 5 days, and it came back in 2 days. And one was benign, but there was a cluster, and it's precancerous, and we're being told that is about to transition into cancer. And it's not the things you want to hear. It's not the things you want to walk through. But as I said on Monday when we were up there, I texted someone, I said, I believe it's why God has been speaking a testimony. Because I think we'll have a testimony out of this. I would rather, as a husband, I would rather be my testimony, but it'll be our testimony together. I'd rather be walking it through it myself than her. But he knows my wife. So we are asking for prayer. We have an appointment on the 5th of April with the surgeon and see what he has to say. But we're believing that God is going to bring a testimony out of this. We are thankful that it was not cancer. We are thankful for that. But we know that he has something to do out of this. He desires us to seek him. He desires us to have people intercede. He desires us to come to him. As I close, I want to share one thing. There's a pastor in Washington, D.C. named Mark Batterson. He writes books, and I love his books. I've referred to him many times. He has one called The Circle Maker, and it's about circling things in prayer, and it's about intercession. Well, usually every year during Lent, I pull out the daily, his devotional book called Draw the Circle. And this week, I want to read part of what this week's was, what I read this week. It said, "None of my dreams have happened quickly or easily. There was nothing glamorous or glorious about the early days of our church plant adventure. There were certainly moments when I felt like quitting, when I was tempted to think of all our efforts wouldn't make such much difference. After all, our average attendance was 25 people, and those 25 people could have found a much better church to attend. But I was thinking in present tense terms. When you quit circling, and I believe that you could change the word to intercede, you don't just compromise the present. Every promise, every miracle, every blessing in your future is forfeited. If I had called it quits, I would have bailed not only on the 25 people I was pastoring at the time, I would have bailed on the thousands we're influencing now and the tens of thousands we'll influence in the future. If the Israelites had stopped circling Jericho, they would have forfeited their first victory in the Promised Land. But there was much more at stake than that. They would have forfeited the Promised Land altogether. But they didn't stop. They kept circling. And if you keep circling, the walls will come down. If you pray through, the breakthrough is inevitable." I believe that. I believe that God desires a breakthrough in each of us. I believe there's people that God is desiring a breakthrough in, and he's asking us to intercede. He's asking us to circle those people in prayer. As it said, if they had stopped after 6 days, Jericho would not have fallen. It took the 7th day. God desires to move. So don't stop praying. Don't stop interceding. There's people that you're interceding for that need to know Christ. There's people that you're interceding for that need healing. And all God is asking is to keep on praying, keep on asking, and I will move. Father God, we thank